Dog Works Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dog Works. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com. You can support this podcast on patreon.com/Teamaneke.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by First Paw Coffee Company, specializing in private label premium blend coffee. If you're serious about coffee, you should check it out. First Paw Coffee's passion is high-quality, small-batch roasted coffee. They take the extra time to taste and get everything perfect before they release new blends. They aim to bring you a cup of happiness each time you pour yourself some coffee. Find out more at ak.dog/free and enter for a chance to win some First Paw Coffee prizes, a book from our collection, and tote bag. One winner will be selected at random each month. That's ak.dog/free.
Radio Free Palmer 89.5 KVRF presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Robert Forto, and you're listening to Mushing Radio here on KVRF 89.7 in the Mat-Su Valley. RadioFreePalmer.org is our live streaming site, and you can hear all of our episodes over on DogWorksRadio.com. Be sure to check us out on social media, and we are joined today by our co-host, Alex Stein. Alex, how's it going?
It's going great, Robert. We are here in California, where they have put us onto, as an entire state, onto effectively lockdown, trying to get people not to leave their homes except for essential things that they need to do, such as going to doctors and going to the grocery store. But we're also allowed to go out for walks and go out and walk our dogs. But it's a strange kind of thing to be under this semi-lockdown.
It is, and unfortunately, I think that that's coming for us in the near future, and we have an interesting story about kind of the Musher's way of life that we're going to talk about later before our Musher profile. But what is more interesting is what's happened over the last 24 hours on the Iditarod. Only 7 people have finished. There's been a whole bunch of scratches, and there's quite a storm that is brewing in the area from White Mountain on. What can you tell us first, Alex, about just the number of people that have finished in the last day or so?
Yeah, so it's very unusual that we've had so little movement, and we've had a bunch of people who have been basically sitting in White Mountain for quite a while, perhaps waiting for a break in the storm. And we have a group of people sitting in Elam who haven't moved in quite a while. But since we were on the air, we had up to number 23 come in. So Jeff Dieter, Kelly Maxner, Ali Zirkel, Tom Johansson, and Tim Pappas came in, and those are up to the top 20. So those guys are in the money, and we'll share the big prize pool. And then after that, all the finishers just get $1,049. And as of now, that also includes Lance Mackey, Jessica Klika, and Lev Schwartz. And it's interesting because Lance and Tim Pappas were coming in, and they were very, very close. But then as they started approaching Front Street, it became clear that Lance wasn't going to be able to beat Tim in, and he just kind of pulled back and stopped before he came up off the ice to let Tim kind of have his moment in the sun, so to speak, which I thought was really a nice and very amazing thing for Lance to do.
And Tim, he is the guy that's running Martin Busser's team, is that right?
Right, yeah.
So yeah, what a gesture on Lance's part. You know, this was really Tim's time to time to shine, so to speak, because that put him in that last money spot. And as we've said in previous coverage, he's running the A team for Martin, and not a bad deal finishing there in the 20th spot.
Yeah, and then what is also really interesting to me is that we have a lot of people just kind of hunkered down and staying still at the moment. So Sean Underwood and two others are in White Mountain, and Sean got in at 1:59 in the morning. And usually when people are in White Mountain, they will leave almost exactly 8 hours after they arrived, sometimes a few minutes more than that, but rarely much more than 8 hours. And he could have left around 10 in the morning, and that was now 9 hours ago, and he is still in White Mountain. Similarly, we've got a bunch of teams that are in Elam who have been there for quite a long time, some of them since this time yesterday.
Wow. And I was reading the reports about the weather. I guess it's one heck of a storm. I think I read somewhere that they had about 2 feet of snow, very little visibility. And they get storms quite a lot in this area, but typically nothing that really shuts down their race like this. Am I right?
Yeah, I can't recall the last time that happened. It's been many years. There are reports in early Iditarods before I really started following the race about how storms would sometimes come in and shut the race down for, more than a day, sometimes 2 days or 3 days. And I really don't recall that happening since I've been closely following the race.
Yeah, we're in unprecedented times for sure. But what is also interesting is the number of scratches. We haven't seen this many scratches in a long time. And I think that Didi reported it's been since the 80s. Is that correct? That this many folks, or more than this many folks, have scratched in a given year?
Yeah, and it's interesting because in the early part of the race, where I thought there might be more scratches, we didn't have very many at all. We had Jim Lanier, and then that was it for a long time. But the past 48 hours, we've seen a tremendous number of scratches. And since we were on the air last night, Karin Hendrickson scratched. She was in Shaktoolik, which is not a manned checkpoint anymore, and she may have activated her SOS thing on her tracker. Robert Reddington scratched at Elam. Nick Pettit scratched. He was at Golovin, and I believe he hit his SOS thing. He was at there's a shelter cabin there, and he was between Elam and White Mountain at that cabin. Jason Campo just scratched a little while ago, and Robert Bunsen scratched at Elam. And, taken all together, those and the scratches that we saw yesterday at Unalakleet and Quince Mountain being withdrawn from the race, I was thinking last night and this morning that there was just a lot of pressure on people to get out of the race. And I wondered if some of these scratches that took place in Unalakleet were people who were kind of encouraged to scratch, or people who were told this would be a good thing for you to do. We did hear that Quince didn't want to. Quince was encouraged to scratch. He wanted to keep going, and that's why they withdrew him. So that seemed to me like it might indicate that there was pressure to shut the race down. And it's interesting because when Lev came in this afternoon and the top 20 was safely in and up to number 23, and also nobody else was really moving at White Mountain or Elam, and there's a group of 5 mushers who are traveling together who are on their way to Elam from Koyuk. But with so many people sort of stopped, I was convinced for several hours this afternoon that the race was about to be shut down, that the race would be canceled, and anybody who was still on the trail would not be allowed to come into Nome.
And last night we asked the question, and I don't think we got any responses, and I don't know if you had time to look it up. What happens if the race is shut down? In all the years that I've followed this, I don't think it's ever been shut down, and I've been following it since the late 90s or so. And in particular, what happens to the rookies? Do you have any idea?
I don't, and I think that is kind of an unanswered question. I was talking to my wife actually this afternoon, and she was saying, "Well, what would the rookies, would rookies who are in White Mountain, for example, would they get their $1,049? Would they get their belt buckle? Does that count as finishing the race if the race is stopped?" And that's a very good question, and I don't think, this has never come up before, so I don't know that there's any contingency for that. Some people have suggested that maybe what they would do is they would give the people who were still on the trail free or discounted entry fees next year. Another possibility is to declare that they had finished, even though they didn't get all the way to Nome. If that happened, I'm sure that would annoy a lot of people. So I don't really know, and I'm not sure that there is a good answer to those questions that would satisfy everybody.
Am I wrong? There used to be a rule, or maybe it's more obscure than I'm remembering, something about 750 miles. I think that may count towards the Yukon Quest. If a person goes 750 miles in the Iditarod or something, do you recall that in any discussions you've ever heard?
I haven't heard that rule before, but that doesn't mean it's not there, just that I'm not familiar with it.
So what is interesting with all of these scratches is they're sort of clumped up together in different checkpoints, and that would lead to believe that that they have sort of a strategy to do that. You had mentioned that I think you said five folks out there are traveling together. That's pretty common on the trail, isn't it?
Right, and especially when people are scratching and are being withdrawn and are being encouraged to to finish, perhaps to scratch, that it's common for people to travel in a pack, because it's harder to be frank, it's harder to withdraw 5 teams at once than if there's one team who's significantly behind. It's easier to point to that team and just withdraw that one team.
Yeah, and from a musher's perspective, just because they're traveling together in a pack does not necessarily mean that they are together in a pack. And a great example of that is the Sierra expedition that we just went on. And we had 5 teams in that group, and we had several snow machiners. And just about everybody left together, meaning they left the checkpoint or that night's lodging, but they could literally be spread out for 10 miles over the trail, because there are teams that are faster. There are mushers that snack more or stop more or untangle more and all sorts of stuff. So even though they're traveling together does not necessarily mean it's like a train going down the trail, isn't it?
Right. And in this case, they're within, I think, about 5 miles of each other. But that is, that's not right on top of each other, even though they're fairly close.
Right. So the scratches that we have tonight, or the ones that we had tonight, you had mentioned that 2 of them potentially pressed the SOS button. I know Nick Pettit, they reported that he did. For folks that are new to this, what does that mean?
So when they started putting the GPS trackers on the sleds, the GPS trackers have essentially an SOS button that you can press if you are in some sort of dire straits, or you need help. Either there's something going on with you, there's something going on with your team. So you have this option. If you need help, you can press this. If you do press it, you are automatically out of the race. So it's not something that people do lightly. And in addition, mushers tend to be fairly self-reliant, and they pride themselves on being tough and being able to take care of situations that come up. So it generally is not something that happens unless it's really necessary.
And to be clear, these types of devices that they're using in today's Iditarod are not like the inReaches or anything that has two-way communication. This is a one-way communication device. When you take that, and they're typically attached to the front of the sled in a dog booty, and they have to be out so they can get signals from satellites. When you take that out of the booty or the little pouch, and it's a deliberate effort to press this. You cannot do it by accident. You usually have to move a button over or remove some type of guard or whatever, and then press that SOS button. But what's most interesting about it is it's a one-way communication. You have no idea per se if the other side got it. There may be a light that blinks that says that it was transmitted, but you don't know if they, you could probably know that they got it just by the technology of itself, but you have no idea how long it's going to be before somebody gets there. Is that right?
Right. And, keep in mind that in a lot of cases, when people press these buttons, they are very far away from the nearest checkpoint. I think in Nick's case, he was 20 or 30 miles from the nearest checkpoint. So for someone to come, and usually it would be a snow machiner who would come, or if there's someone nearby, sometimes the race would request that someone who is nearby come and check on this person. I think in Nick's case, it was the Golovin search and rescue team that came and got him. But sometimes it's snow machiners from other checkpoints, and that literally can take, hours and hours in order to get to the person.
In Nick's case, he pressed the button, I believe, last year as well in an area that's pretty close to here. Was it at the same cabin? And I asked that because you had said he was in that safety cabin there on Golovin Bay, which is a notoriously treacherous part of the Iditarod Trail, especially during storms and high winds and all that. But he was pretty protected inside that shelter. Am I right?
Yeah, he was. And I think, I'm not positive, but I think where he had run into trouble before was north of Shaktoolik on the other ice on Norton Sound.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't 100% sure on that. So is he okay? Was it a dog issue? Was it just merely he got stuck in pretty bad weather and he decided that he couldn't continue? Do you have any idea or report?
I have heard that he is okay, but haven't heard much beyond that. So it could very well be related to the weather, because the weather has just been socking people in. For example, Jason Campo left from White Mountain. He went, I think, 10 or 15 miles and then turned around and came back and then scratched a couple of hours later. And there were also a couple of people who had left from Elam and gone a few miles and then come back to rest in Elam before trying to go out again. So this storm that has been sort of plaguing the race is pretty severe at this point.
And for folks that may not know, the trail is pretty well marked throughout the entire course, I guess. They're typically placed about every quarter to a half mile, and they're very visible in most weather conditions. They are typically a wooden slat with typically orange paint and some type of reflective material. So they're very visible at night. When we were traveling on the Serum Run, we were following markers that were very similar to Iditarods that were put out by the Iron Dog. And even at night, you could see, even in the bad weather, you could see the markers on the Yukon for a mile or two just by your headlamp reflecting off of that reflective material. So unless they get off the trail or the markers get knocked down, which happens, especially if there's a lot of snow machine traffic in and around a lot of these villages, it's pretty well marked, isn't it?
Yeah, although every year we also hear that there are reports of some parts of the trail where the markers get knocked down or they get blown away or something like that. And there's always a few stories about parts of the trail that weren't as well marked as they could be, and people either get lost or they're not sure if they're lost, and they stop to try to make sure that they're on the right trail. So it is generally very well marked, but especially at this point in the race, sometimes it's not as well marked for the people coming through now as it was for the leaders when they came through a day or two ago.
And two more points on the markings and the trail itself. Since the last few years, now mushers are allowed to carry GPS devices. And when I was on the Serum Run trip, I had an inReach. And right there on the inReach, there is a dotted line on the screen, and right there on the line it says Iditarod Trail. So if you do have a GPS or an inReach or anything like that, you can pretty much follow that track and be right there on the potentially the trail that they've used over and over again. And remember, they do change that for weather and obstacles like overflow or whatever, but there is a set trail on a GPS. And that was the first time I had seen that. So I thought that was pretty pertinent information. And secondly, you would be absolutely surprised how well the dogs can find a scent on the trail and just run with it. In my experience, especially on river running, I've had dogs that have crossed over a mile-wide river like the Sioux River or the Yukon or any large spans, and they can pick up a trail just like that where we don't see anything, but those dogs are following the tracks of all those other dogs, and that's just what makes sled dogs a very unique type of dog, of course, and a way to get down the trail where you may not even see anything.
Right. And, that's especially true of dogs who have run the Iditarod before. They know what they're looking for. They have this sense of where the trail goes, in a general sense, as well as like the specific trail from picking up the scent.
Right. So before we do our musher profile of the evening, we have kind of another coronavirus update, COVID-19 update that I've been thinking about today, and I think a lot of our fans will find this quite interesting. And at the top of the show, Alex, you had mentioned that your governor, just right before we went on the air, put you guys on a lockdown of sorts, meaning you cannot travel except for groceries. And you said, well, you can go for a walk in the park. But for all intents and purposes, you guys are on a lockdown. And we're in a unique situation up here in Alaska where, of course, you have to travel through Canada to get to us. And there's only really two ways to do that now, unless it's in the middle of the summer, you're traveling by ship. And that is either driving through Canada on the Alaskan highway or by air. And as of right now, the Canadian border is closed to all non-essential travel, meaning pleasure travel and all of that. But both President Trump and the governor of Alaska and I believe the Prime Minister of Canada said that the borders are still open for trade. And if that closes, that's going to put mushers in a pretty precarious situation. And you and I were talking off air about this. Most mushers don't have the capabilities to store but about 4 or 5 or maybe a week's worth of meat. And as everybody knows, when they go into the store today, everything's gone. All the vegetables are gone, all the toilet paper, all the cleaning supplies, all of that is gone. And with us mushers, there's only one feed store that pretty much takes care of a heck of a lot of mushers here in the Matsu Valley, in the Anchorage area, pretty much south of Fairbanks, and that is Underdog Feeds, that it's owned by Lisbeth Norris's family, and they've had that business for years. So all of us go there to shop for our dog food, and most of us buy boxes of meat. They come in 10-pound tubes, and then we buy however many boxes that we can fit in a freezer at a time. But most mushers only have chest freezers, the same type of freezers that most other people have to keep their extra food. They don't have a way to store vast amounts of this meat and or other types of supplements, whether it be skins or fish or whatever. So if they were to lock us down, I think that would put the mushing community in quite the quandary in terms of being able to access vast amounts of meat. And I say that because we feed 40 pounds of meat per day for our dogs. We have about 40 sled dogs. Every dog gets about a pound of meat and about a half a pound or a pound of kibble. So that could be a really interesting situation. What do you think about that, Alex, from a fan's perspective?
I think that's exactly the sort of thing that we don't tend to think about, and it really kind of underscores how interconnected the world is these days. And we have these elaborate supply chains to provide us with goods and especially with food, and usually we don't give it a second thought. We go to the supermarket and there's cheese and there's meat and there's produce, and we don't really think about where this comes from or what the process is to replace it until, as happened here about a week ago, people just went into ridiculous panic buying mode. And the good news is that even though it is very scary to go into one of these supermarkets that you're used to seeing, fully stocked or almost fully stocked, and see like many aisles where there's basically nothing there, the good news is that there is no shortage of food at the moment. So, for example, my local supermarket, which was cleaned out to a shocking extent, I think last Wednesday or Thursday, by Monday, they had a lot more things there. We're still having trouble getting toilet paper, but we were able to get paper towels today, and they have meat, which was totally sold out, and they have like new supplies of produce and of soups and things like that. So I'm hoping that as these kind of shutdowns and orders to not go out and to have people work from home and stay in their houses more go into effect all over the country, that we're able to avoid some of this panic buying, because it doesn't really help anybody. It does. I have a neighbor who came home and he bought 5 of these giant things that had 48 rolls of toilet paper in each one. So that's 220 rolls of toilet paper. And, that's ridiculous. I would hope more toilet paper than his family is going to use in a year or maybe more. And you don't need that.
Yeah, you don't. And back to the dog food front, our stores are a heck of a lot less stocked, it sounds like, than yours. I went to the local Fred Meyer grocery store yesterday in my ever-present quest for paper products, and they didn't have any. But what was also interesting is all of the dog food in the pet aisle. All the big bags of the store brand dog food was gone as well. And this could be interesting, as I said, for the mushing community. We don't have 1 or 2 pet dogs that a 40-pound bag of IAMS will last us a month or two. We go through a bag of kibble about every 2 or 3 days. And as our listeners know, you just can't feed 40 sled dogs a different diet. I mean, unlike us, we could go to the store and survive on top ramen or whatever. It may not be palatable, but we can survive on that. I think that we're in for a really interesting couple of weeks, especially up here in Alaska, if that supply chain gets shut down. And I just want to make the fans of the show aware of that, because I think there's going to be a lot of chatter about that, especially as the mushers start getting back into civilization. I doubt that this is the first thing on their minds, probably not even the first thing on the minds of the handlers or their family and friends. But I think that that's going to be something that plays out over the next few days, and I think that we should update our listeners about that. So enough about that, Alex. Before we run out of time here, Who is our musher profile of the evening?
So tonight we're going to talk about Sean Underwood, who is the rookie who stepped in on Tuesday night to before the race to run Jeff King's dog team. Sean is 28. He was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, graduated from Georgia Southern University with a degree in economics. And the year after he finished college, he went to Central and South America, was staying with relatives in Chile, and traveling and working around there. Came up to Alaska in 2015 because he didn't really want to go into the corporate world and wasn't quite sure what to do. And he had an aunt and uncle who live up in Alaska, and he called them one day and said, "Well, what do you do up in Alaska? What are you interested in?" And they told him that they were commercial fishermen, and he said, "Oh, well, maybe I could come up there for a summer and work for you and help out and see how that goes." And so he did that, doing sockeye salmon fishing off of Kodiak Island. And after he spent 2 consecutive summers doing that and eating fish, he thought, well, maybe I should try staying in Alaska for the winter. And his aunt and uncle said, "Oh, we're friends with Jeff King, and maybe we could hook you up with Jeff King. He's won the Iditarod 4 times." And Sean said that was interesting. And then he waited until his aunt and uncle had gone to bed before he went and Googled Jeff King and found out what the Iditarod was, because he was familiar with dog sled racing but didn't really know much about that. So he was hired in 2016 to work for Jeff's operation up there at Husky Homestead, and survived his first winter. Started out as everyone does when they're helping out with a sled dog operation, scooping poop and taking care of the dogs. And he said that he slowly got to working with the dogs more and more, and he gained more responsibility every year that he was there. He said that when Jeff called him on Tuesday after he had this emergency operation, that Jeff said, "Well, I can't run the Iditarod, so I want you to run my dog team." And Jeff said that he had talked to Mark Nordman, who is the race marshal, and Mark said that it would probably be okay, but they had to clear it with the qualifying committee, and then they would be in touch with him. And then he sort of spent hours on that day, kind of wondering if this was actually happening, and if maybe Jeff was loopy from his pain medication, or didn't really understand what he was saying. And then at 7:00 that night, he got a call from Mark Nordman, and he said, "You've been approved unanimously," primarily because he had been working with these dogs, some of them since the day that they were born. And when Jeff called him to tell him he wanted him to run the Iditarod, he said, "Sean, you got to put on your big boy pants now, because you're going to go run the Iditarod." And that was on Tuesday night. And then he had all day Wednesday to basically get everything together that he would need to run Iditarod and get down to Anchorage so that he could be there on Thursday morning for the Musher meeting. And he has said in interviews that he's a natural procrastinator. So this is probably very helpful to him, because if he were running in 2021 as he had planned it, he might have put a lot of things off until the last minute anyway. He told his hometown newspaper that there are people who have definitely run the Iditarod who have less experience than he has, and he feels confident because he knows how to take care of the dogs, he knows how to feed the dogs, and more importantly, that they're Jeff King's dog team. And he said that it was very odd to him after the banquet before the banquet when they did the Musher meet and greet, and they had a line of 20 people waiting for 90 minutes who wanted his autograph and wanted to ask him how he was feeling. And he's not used to this as someone who works for Jeff and is mostly very much in the background. He said that working with these dogs is like having a Lamborghini to drive. And he said, I'm really excited about it, but it's not like I'm going to be driving down the Autobahn at 200 miles per hour. So he is running a very, very good race. He told the Insider that there hasn't been a whole lot that's been unexpected, but that it's very interesting to him to be able to balance the hardships that you go through on the trail with just being out there in the beautiful Alaskan wilderness, which he described as being like a cleansing of the soul. He has, before this, run the Alpine Excursion Race, the Tustamina 200 in 2017, the Copper Basin 300 in 2018. This year he ran the Yukon Quest 300 and the Goose Bay 150. His dad told the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, "This is an unbelievable accomplishment. We're so proud of him, who he is as a person, and his connection and commitment to the canine athletes is humbling. And it's also very emotional to see your son taking on such an iconic athletic journey." And he is currently in White Mountain. He's been there since, as we said, since about 2 a.m. And the one comment he had about what he had learned on this race is he said that he had used his ski poles for about 15 minutes and was still sore from that. And he said, I don't know how Ali Zirkle is able to do that for 500 miles. But he's having a really good race. And I think that this is definitely someone that we're going to hear a lot from in the years to come.
You know, Alex, we talked about this early in our coverage when we were talking about Sean and John Schandelmeyer getting that last-minute approval to join the race. And like you said, this is something that most people plan years for. Some people, I don't remember who it was that has been working towards this for 5 years. One of our Musher profiles has been working towards this for 5 years. And of course, Sean knew he was going to do it next year. He was approved, or he finished all of the qualifiers this year, running the Yukon Quest 300 and the Goose Bay 150 to finish out those qualifiers. But he was not prepared per se to get a call on Tuesday morning. I can only imagine the things that were going through his mind in that couple of days. I'm sure there was a heck of a lot of butterflies. I'm sure there was a lot of sleepless nights, even though it was only a couple, to really get your mind around what's going to happen in the next few days. Maybe he was just calm, cool, and collected, like I've seen him on the videos online these last couple of weeks. He looks like he's a pretty calm dude, but I can only imagine what was going through his mind.
Yeah, and he said that he wasn't sure that he would even be allowed to do that because he wasn't planning on running, so he missed the rookie meeting in December, and that's a mandatory meeting. So he wasn't sure that they would waive the requirement that he attend this meeting in December, which he hadn't. And then I think ultimately the reason that they chose to allow him to run the dog team and not someone who was not make Jeff choose someone who was an Iditarod veteran instead is that he was so familiar with the dogs. And, as we talked about earlier in this race, there's the mantra that Iditarod fans always give and Iditarod mushers always give is that it's all about the dogs. And I think in this case, and with John Schandelmeyer taking Zoya's team down the trail, in this case, that's a very clear example of it really being all about the dogs.
Yeah, I wish him well. I'm sure he will be able to finish. He has about 70 miles or so to go, unless, of course, something drastic happens, like they call the race or something like that. I'm sure he's gone this far. I'm sure he will have no problems doing that last 70 miles, and he will be an official Iditarod finisher. That's got to be a heck of an accomplishment and something he's worked very hard for sure. Alex, we're way over time. Anything else in closing?
Well, from what I've seen of the weather reports, they're expecting that this storm is going to last until about noon tomorrow. So, assuming that the race is going forward, I think we can expect people to start leaving White Mountain and to start leaving Elam sometime in the morning, and then hopefully by the time we're on the air tomorrow night, we should have a bunch more finishers.
We should have everybody finished by tomorrow night if they're allowed to leave at a respectable time. Even if they leave at noon, they should be pretty close to being finished late tomorrow night, I believe.
Yeah, and again, as we keep saying, in any normal year,
right,
they would be in, but clearly this is not a normal year.
Very good, Alex. It's always a pleasure. Thank you very much for being on tonight. And on behalf of my co-host, Alex Stein, this is Robert Forto for Mushing Radio. We will see you guys tomorrow at the same time. Goodbye.
This episode of the podcast is sponsored by First Paw Coffee Company. Learn more at firstpaw.coffee.
From Dogworks Radio, this is Mushing Radio. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Alex Stein and Robert Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto, created for Dogworks Radio. Did you know that Alaska Dogworks trains service dogs for those in need throughout North America? Each and every service dog that is trained through the Lead Dog Service Dog Program and Michelle Forto and her team has an individual training plan. We train for autistic, mobility, psychiatric, and PTSD for our soldiers for service work. If you know of someone that may need a service dog, please take a moment and check out Alaska Dogworks on social media and at alaskadogworks.com.